In this video, we will be focusing on object-oriented programming with a particular focus on the generation of pseudocode for hierarchical class diagrams. Now, the previous videos in this series look at the definition of the vehicle class and the creation of objects from that class, so we won't spend too much time on it, but a quick refresher will suffice. So let's quickly look at the vehicle class. We have the class name vehicle, the attributes of the class, followed by the methods of the class. So we have the constructor in our first line, followed by the accessor and mutator methods. Remembering accessor mutators are sometimes known as getters and setters. So what's new in this video is the arrow here. Now, this arrow isn't very intuitive, so I've put a little red ink comment here to help. Van inherits from vehicle. That's very important to remember that. So the data flow is going from vehicle down to van. So what that means is the van class will inherit all of the attributes of vehicle. So in total, the van will have 4 attributes. It will have the 3 inherited attributes of the vehicle, annual tax cost, valid insurance and registered keeper, as well as the weight carrying capacity attribute. So 4 attributes in total. The van class will also inherit the methods from the vehicle class. So not only will it have its own constructor, it has its own getter and setter methods which will access and mutate the data within the weight carrying capacity attribute. It will also have the methods inherited from the parent class vehicle. Now, depending on which book you read, a parent class and a child class, that's one way to think of it. Another way to define them is this is a superclass and a subclass. Again, it all depends on the author of the book. Now, the next thing I'd like to talk about is the order of attributes within the constructor. We know the order of the attributes for the vehicle class is annual tax cost, valid insurance, and then the keeper. So the first 3 parameters of the van class will be exactly the same in the same order: annual tax cost, valid insurance, and the registered keeper. But we will also be passing in this additional parameter of weight capacity, and that will then be used by the constructor of the van to initialize the attribute weight carrying capacity. So pupils must remember to keep the order of the inherited parameters from the parent class, add on the parameters where required for the child class. That's very important that this order is kept. So now we will look at this question here, and it asks us to write the pseudocode for a constructor of the van class. So we'll now look at the pseudocode solution for that. So now let's look at the pseudocode for the constructor for the van class. We have our UML class diagram on the left hand side and the pseudocode on the right. We will be going into the detail for the remainder of the code for the van class in the next video. But for now we are going to focus purely on this line here, which is the constructor of a van class. So it's public, so it's accessible in and outside of the class. New tells us that it's a constructor method. The first three parameters must match exactly the same three parameters of the parent class. So whatever parameters a parent class has, they must be an exact match for the child class. But the van has an additional attribute of weight carrying capacity. So therefore we are going to use a parameter to pass to the constructor to initialize this attribute. So now let's look at the constructor coding. So we have our class van inherits vehicle. So this is the header line for the van class. I've just left that in for clarity's sake. I've also left the attribute weight carrying capacity, just so you can see that we're following the rules of have our attributes first, then the constructor. So the constructor itself, we can see, is a public, so it's matching the definition on the UML class diagram. It's a procedure because it doesn't return any data. New tells us it's a constructor. We have an exact match on the parameters as seen in the UML class diagram. What's new is on line 64 we can see this line here, super.new, and then the parameters of tax, insurance and keeper. So what this line is doing is this is calling the parent constructor. So to create a van class, we have to first of all create an object of type vehicle that will then allow us to inherit the attributes and methods from the parent class. So to create a van, we must inherit these attributes and methods. So when you see the command super.new, this simply means call the parent's constructor. So we're creating a parent object from the parent class. Once we've done that, that constructor call will initialize the fields that are being inherited, the tax, the insurance and the keeper. So all that remains for us to do is to take the parameter for weight carrying capacity, which is the parameter P weight capacity, and use it to initialize the attribute weight carrying capacity, which we can see here in the class diagram. So remember, this little video is purely looking at the constructor definition, because that's what the exam question asked us to do. Write a constructor for the class van. It hasn't asked us to write any of the other remaining pseudocode. That will be covered in an exam question that would state write the code for the class van.